Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door. Hello to YouTube. Hello to Facebook. Let's see if we can bring the Facebook just a little bit closer here. That way we don't have to look in odd directions. Good to have all of you here today. We'll knock it out and get some comments going here. We will have some fun. Boy, Jay Shibe, it's hard to beat him into the comment section. He's among the first each and every day. So, Jay, thanks for being here, and I appreciate you being a part of what we're doing. We're going to talk a little bit about black jerseys today. Yes, that could not be, a sort of less serious topic than that, but I did think that Georgia's football Twitter account had an interesting tweet about this over the course of the last couple of days. So we'll have some fun with that here coming up in just a little bit. We'll take a lot of your comments. Eddie is here as per usual. Good to have him. We'll have a new version of our Gator Hater Updater here in just a little bit. Beard starting to come in a little bit more, getting a little thicker here in this area, starting to come in a little bit more around the cheeks, getting a little grayer down at the bottom. So, you got to do with that what you will. Keith Finney, good to see you. Realistic One, good to see you. Robert Bryan over on YouTube. I believe this is kind of a new one for Bobby Bryan on the YouTube side, typically a Facebook guy. But good to have you here. BA's daddy, of course, checking in. VTW checking in as well. So we're going to have a good time on the program today. I'm sure I'll be asked to show this again, but we'll do more of this on our podcast today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. Let me give you the tweet that I was kind of talking about. So here's Georgia football, the equipment account on Twitter saying which jersey you like better, showing off the Jordan Davis with the white and the red and the black. And they were asking, which one of these do you like the best? Which obviously, if you look at the replies, the overwhelming number of the replies are like black jerseys. We want the black jerseys. And then even some fans are even saying, why are y'all even doing this? Because we know that you're never wearing these black jerseys in a game, which is obviously part of the joke. And part of, what's kind of funny about this now is that UGA fans who want the black jerseys have essentially resigned themselves to the fact they're not going to get the black jerseys. So all of that is kind of fun to be able to see. And so we'll talk more about that on the podcast today, including what Smart said about this in the past and whether maybe it is time just to break these things out. My idea about this in the past has been, hey, let's just completely destigmatize this all the way around. And from now on, instead of picking a big game to wear them or picking a game to wear them, what if for 1 year Georgia just wore them the entire time? Just completely wore them, made them the home jersey for a year. Then after that, you could kind of choose to wear them or choose not to wear them and kind of get away from what is obviously a little bit of a problem for Smart, which is the potential distraction associated with it. Smart doesn't want distractions, never wanted that. So to kind of get away from that, maybe Georgia should just plan on wearing them the entire time. As Smart has said before, clearly this is something that recruits like. So we'll talk more about that if you guys want to, and I'll certainly deal with that more on the podcast today. I'll also let you hear a little bit from Smart, who had a challenge to the UGA student athletes to make sure they stay on top of their academics. In our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with John Stinchcomb today on the podcast, we'll talk to John, who's on the athletic board and has some insight into stuff like this. We'll kind of talk to him about what it's going to be like for students staying on top of their academics right now, just knowing they don't really quite have that same level of accountability. So we can deal with all of that, and we'll have a good time doing so today. Van West on Facebook says, I'm still rocking the quarantine board beard, I should say. Yeah, I am. It's not quite as itchy as it once was, so maybe we're kind of turning a corner with this thing a little bit. George Herndon checking in. George, good to have you here. Memphis Dog says he likes the idea of the black jerseys for the last home game. And I guess I'm also in favor of something like that, where it's either always wearing them for a night game, although in the early portion of the season, even at night, it's really, really hot. So maybe the black jerseys would be even hotter. But saying you always wear them at night games, or you always wear them for the last game of the season, or you sort of pick that time where you're always going to wear them, I'm also sort of okay with that. Brian McRae says, I'm all for the black jerseys, better yet an all black uniform. And, for someone like me who's a traditionalist by nature, but also a little bit of a populist in that I am sort of fine with whatever the majority of Georgia fans want. This is where things get to be a little bit of a slippery slope for me, because while I'm sort of okay with black jerseys, as long as that's about the only real change that gets made, some of you are like, well, if you're going to wear black jerseys, now you got to wear all black, and you got to have red pants. You got to wear black jerseys with red pants. You got to get silver helmets. You got to get this. You got to get that. And, kind of on and on. It kind of goes at a certain point in time. So, listen, I guess at a certain point, maybe Georgia will be like the rest of these teams that are wearing like a million different uniforms. That would not be my preference, but I am kind of coming around a little bit more on the black jerseys. Dapper Dan says wear them for Florida only every year. It's an interesting idea. Bulldog Freak Zoid checking in. Good to have you here. VTW says black jerseys for the big games at home. George also says wear them when you reach the playoffs, which is an interesting idea. LaChase White says, I've been ready for the black jerseys, or at least switching the pants from gray pants to black. I mean, this is one of the things I also kind of talked to John about today for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider update, is that because Georgia's like color scheme is, I mean, you got to admit, like I got the gear on today. Like this is just sharp gear, right? Black, silver, gray like this. The G could not be better looking. It's like it'd be hard not to look good in like the Georgia colors. For now, I think sometimes, you know, there's a certain apparel maker. Sometimes I think the certain apparel makers have a hard time getting the red right. It ends up kind of looking sort of tomatoey in some respects. But for the most part, the Georgia gear just pretty well looks good on anybody. I mean, can you imagine if this was like DawgNation Daily and I was a Virginia Tech guy and I got like the maroon and orange on? I mean, it's not a very nice color scheme, and I'm not quite sure that I would look very good in that color scheme. Luckily, the red and black looks good on just about anybody. So from that standpoint, you know, Georgia's got lots of different options they can bring together. James Hightower says they should wear black every time they play Alabama. That's also an interesting idea as well. I mean, it really is, you know, obviously one of the reasons why Georgia, I think, is hesitant to wear them now is because what happened against Bama in 2008. So if you're really looking to destigmatize the black jerseys, going back to where the problem began versus the Crimson Tide in 2008 might be a pretty good way to do that. As I touch my face again when I'm not supposed to. AU, thanks for the kind words on YouTube. Appreciate that. Light Dog 1968, also thanks for the kind words there as well. One of the things we'll also talk about on the podcast today is the fact that there are a couple of examples of, hey, you know, we're kind of getting some football stuff back to normal here. You know, we're kind of getting into a scenario where the SEC has now okayed the video conference meetings, which I think it's just kind of comforting to know, right? Whether it be for the practical reason of, well, now Todd Monken and Jamie Newman get to talk about how this offense is going to look with the new quarterback, new offensive coordinator. Beyond that, there's just something comforting about the fact that football meetings are now going to be taking place, even if they have to be teleconference-wise, and even if the players and coaches aren't allowed on campus, the fact that they are talking and meeting together, there's just something kind of comforting about all of that. So we can kind of get into that. We'll do more of that on the podcast here today. I'll remind you today that everything is brought to you by our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and I'll show off the nice homemade graphic. I want to make sure I got this set the right way. Pella Window and Door of Georgia can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They are great at that, and that's a really good thing because on the one hand, that can help save money on your energy bills, right? You know, the air conditioning is not escaping during the summer, or the heat's not escaping during the winter. It can also help equip your house with better curb appeal, which could impact the resale value in a positive way. So lots of reasons to like Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Let me give you one more to think about right now, though. A great offer for you that you can currently really get set up with a terrific offer right now. And also, let me remind you this. You can schedule free virtual appointments with Pella Window and Door right now. You go to PellaBranch.com, schedule your virtual appointment. You'll receive an email from your local Pella expert with a link to start your chat, and you'll get a no-pressure consultation. So all of that is a really, really good. A virtual conversation with Pella Window and Door right now, really good. And between now and April 23rd, you can replace every window in your house for as little as $78 a month, or you can get 40% off qualifying installations. Super easy, PellaBranch.com. That's PellaBranch.com. That's the website. Or give them a call at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. That'll get you in touch with Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Andrew Belk says he's working from home. Good to know that. Sean DeBerry says, don't really care what color uniforms, just want some football. I understand that there as well. Christopher White says the weather is amazing in Arizona. We're pretty much on lockdown here, but we get the all clear when the heat of the summer gets here. Yeah, it's one of those things. It was like sort of the best and the worst of the weekend because, you know, my family, we really are trying to observe the lockdown as effectively as we can. So we had a great time being outside. But that mostly meant like driveway, cul-de-sac, back porch. There's a park very close to my house. We're not going to that right now just because we're trying to do our part. So it's like you love the beautiful weather, and I've already been outside today. I'm recording my podcast interviews on my phone outside right now to make sure I get a good cell phone signal. And so if you listen close to the podcast, and I hope that those of you that have time to watch the video will take some time to listen to the podcast, because that's a little bit more like DawgNation Daily, the way that you've come to expect it to be. But if you listen closely during those podcast interviews, you can hear like birds chirping and things like that, which is kind of a funny thing for the broadcast. And the reason why is because we're doing this from home right now. So yeah, it's kind of, and I was already outside today, and the weather's beautiful, but you still feel like you're not fully able to take advantage of it. No golf courses, no baseball, those kinds of things that we love to do outside. Right now, we're not getting a chance to do those. Football fan, what's the chances they cancel the season? So I wrote about this on Friday, DawgNation.com. I was really bothered by Kirk Herbstreit's doomsday proclamation there would be no season. It's not my place to say whether there will be one or there won't be one. I'm not a scientist, and frankly, I'm not going to make any kind of prediction about what the world looks like in a couple of months. But it's important to know that the season is still like 5 months away, and the people pushing the narrative of will there be a season or not, or what's the contingency in case there isn't, this is only media folks who are just looking for something to talk about, and that should just be roundly ignored and rejected. And Herbstreit the same way. And I love Herbstreit on television. I think Herbstreit's a great analyst. I think when you get into stuff like this, I think you're just in over your skis. I think that Herbstreit's in over his skis. I think it's harmful to people who depend on football for their livelihood, and that's more people than you realize. Harmful to them to have this thing of flippantly saying, well, no season, I don't think it's going to be here. And that may be easy for Herbstreit to say, someone who's making multi-million-dollar contract to broadcast. He may be able to make it with a year without work. But the average person who, whether it depends on game days for their business or whether it be a student athlete in another sport, that sport is funded by football or plenty of coaches at lower level programs, they won't be so lucky if the season gets canceled. So what does the future look like? I don't know. But I think it's harmful to a lot of people to start negatively speculating right now. We are still months away from doing this. That is literally just a time filler for an ESPN hot take debate show. It's not anywhere near realistic right now. I'll tell you who I would advise you to pay really close attention to right now. Two different people. One of them is, actually, I'll give you a few here. I thought NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell has been very good on this topic the last few weeks, doing everything he can to keep the train on the tracks. That means the draft's going to take place for the NFL in April, even though a lot of GMs don't want it to because they feel like they're inconvenienced by not being able to evaluate the prospects. Goodell says, hey, tough luck, buddy. Suck it up. We got a draft to do because that's what the sports world needs right now. I think that Greg Sankey has been very optimistic in terms of talking about what the future is going to look like, operating as if the season is going to take place. I think that's the right approach to take. I thought that Tony Clark, the president of the Major League Baseball Players Union the other day, was pretty good to say that they're open to a lot of alternatives to how baseball can get back on the field coming up at some point in time in this season. So I think that in the midst of everything that's going on right now, you see a handful of people who seem to be more solutions-oriented, who seem to be looking for ways to get sports back playing again, as opposed to sort of, and I can't stand this, the way that some people seem to be like wallowing in every negative headline that's out there and just getting a dopamine rush off, projecting the worst possible news over and over again. There are some people in sports who are taking the opposite tack, and I think those are the people that we ought to be paying close attention to, which is not to say that I can guarantee you that everything's going to be safe in the world come September. I can't guarantee anything. None of us can. But the people who are operating as if that we can get to a happy alternative come then, those are the people who you need to be paying the most attention to. And for the people who are saying otherwise right now, just given the fact that we're still so many months away from the start of the season, I just don't think that's worth your attention all that much. Frank Patterson says, what's the best site to buy Bama tickets? As of right now, I'd be waiting all the way around because, A, those tickets haven't even, and I would say this in any year, I think it's always really weird to start buying tickets before the tickets themselves have been printed. And almost always the tickets well out in advance of the game are going to be way more expensive than they are going to be when you kind of, get closer to it. And that's not just true this particular year, but it's really true in any year. So there are a lot of good secondary, market type places to go for something like that. But generally speaking, from a consumer standpoint, I think it's usually a little wiser to wait. Steven Venzani says, will George Pickens be our leading receiver for the 2020 season or another receiver? I would say that Pickens is probably the best bet there on that front. And this is one of those things where Pickens has gotten a lot of offseason attention. It's been nice to see. And you hope that he's able to live up to that on the field. I mean, really, Pickens is probably Georgia's most talked about offensive player right now. Maybe, I guess, behind Jamie Newman at the moment. But you look at a lot of these preseason write-ups in Georgia, you see a lot on Pickens at the moment. And boy, you hope that he's able to handle his business off the field and really adapt to what Todd Monken wants from him, and that he can really live up to that hype once the season begins. But I would say that Pickens is the safest bet to be the leading receiver for Georgia this upcoming season. Frederick Jones says he's missing sports of any kind. Yeah, I'm right there with you. He says, I still hate the Gator Nation, Bama, Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky. He said, I don't like any SEC teams but the Dogs. Frederick, that's nice to hear. Nice to be able to say. Q says, could we see a DawgNation invasion of Tuscaloosa? You better well believe it. You better well believe that's going to be going on. There's going to be a lot of Georgia fans there. Us here at DawgNation are going to be leading the way. No doubt about that. Brennan Verner says, who's our quarterback? I'm trusting Jamie Newman to be that guy, Brennan. I absolutely am. Absolutely trusting him to be that guy. Beham Bus says his kids act like life is so boring right now. Rolled their eyes when I said this was my childhood every day. He says, LOL, isolation in the woods. Yeah. So my kids are a little bit like me. We kind of go back and forth between, having the time of our lives and then being so bored we can't stand it, because there's a lot we can do. I'm lucky I have a big cul-de-sac, so we can get out there, play baseball or whatever else. My kids like running through the sprinklers, and that's been great to do. And so we've had a good time doing a lot of that kind of stuff. But then you do get to a moment where it's like, okay, we've sort of done everything we can do, and it's easy to sort of come back in. And I mean, for me, I tell you this, like, I'm finding the temptation to want to be on Twitter like 24 hours a day and just read everything that's out there and see all the news and stuff like that. At a certain point in time, it's just bad for your health to keep reading all that stuff. And so, I think that the same thing with the kids is like, play, and then it's, temptation will be on YouTube or whatever else. So I think we're kind of fighting that battle here in our home front just a little bit. Let's see what else is going on. Brennan says that he's home because school is out. Yeah, so a lot of folks are maybe checking in. Brennan, hope you're getting that schoolwork done. I'm glad to have you here. Brian Kephart asked a really good question. Do you think that Zion Logue or Timon Mitchell see the field to back up big Jordan Davis? I think that's going to be one of the really interesting storylines to watch for Georgia's upcoming season. First of all, for all of that Tennessee three, Mitchell and Logue, and add Bill Norton in that conversation as well. Norton, a little bit different kind of player, but he's one of those defensive linemen that did come in a couple of years ago from Tennessee. But can Georgia find someone that can be that big space eater, impactful nose guard that can help spell Jordan Davis a little bit when necessary? Because obviously, nobody can be on the field for every single snap. I think watching that, paying attention to that is a very important storyline to observe for the upcoming season. And, a couple of those guys from Tennessee may be as good a candidate to do that as anybody is. But Georgia needs someone else who can do for them what Jordan Davis has been able to do. Pound for pound, and I say that no pun intended, Davis is one of the most important players in the Georgia roster for sure. Eric DeVorncy says, I always work from home, but now my wife is here also. Yeah, I'm sure for a lot of couples, that's kind of a weird thing, during this time of when both people are trying to work from home, the man and the woman, male and female in the couple. That can be a little bit of a weird thing going on right now, right? I mean, luckily for me, my wife's able to, fully devote her time at the moment to just taking care of our kids. But when you've got both parts of the relationship trying to do work from home and you got kids in the mix there as well, that makes for kind of a crowded house sometimes. It feels that way. Jeremy Chapman says, not taking the virus lightly, but the lockdown's been a blessing. I'm getting to spend time with family that otherwise never would have gotten. And I think that's partially been true for me there as well. There are moments which have taken place, Jeremy, where I'm thinking that, wow, this is as much fun as we've ever had. And these are some of the happiest memories that we'll ever have. And looking back on this, hopefully everybody gets back to full health. Years from now, you'll look back on this and I'll remember my kids at the age they are right now. In the midst of that, there is still some frustration of, you just, kind of sad about some of the things you're missing out on for, this is a silly thing, but if my daughter doesn't have a pre-K graduation, which you may laugh at pre-K graduation, but that's the kind of thing that she was looking forward to, may not take place. Some of you have even more substantial graduations than that may get upended, or my son's entire baseball season got canceled. That's one of those things that we've been really looking forward to that, and it just kind of got kind of jerked away from us. So it's they are happy memories, and concurrent to that, there are some disappointments as well. And generally, that's what I kind of find. That life kind of operates on parallel tracks, and it's not, hey, this is a good time in my life, this is a bad time in my life. Typically speaking, there are good times and bad times sort of happening at the same time, and this is obviously just sort of a heightened version of that. I want to get another comment on Facebook that I saw a minute ago. Somebody said that he gets the feeling that I don't like Kirk Herbstreit. What I've said here is there's a version of Kirk Herbstreit that I really like. The guy that's on TV, microphone in his hand, talking to you on ESPN or talking to you on Saturday nights on ABC during the season. I really like that version of Kirk Herbstreit. By the way, it's also fair to point out that Herbstreit's been a pretty strong proponent of Georgia the last couple of years. He's argued pretty heavily in favor of Georgia. From that standpoint, his takes have been friendly to the Dogs. So there's a version of Kirk Herbstreit that I really like. There's a kind of off-camera version of Herbstreit that I just find insufferable. I think he's terrible on Twitter. For those of you that follow me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, the one thing you'll never see me do is I don't think I've ever argued with anybody on Twitter. People, shout at me sometimes and, poke at me or whatever else. And I just sort of let it go. I completely ignore it. I don't argue with anybody. Herbstreit seemingly is always getting these weird Twitter arguments with like these people like not, whatever. I mean, it's amazing the sort of poor social media behavior. And I thought his take on the football season not taking place as flippantly as it came out, I thought it was a bad look for him. So there's a version of Herbstreit that I really like, and there's a version of Herbstreit that I can't stand. And what we saw from him on, I guess, towards the end of last week was a little bit more of the version of Herbstreit that I don't like. James Hayes, on the subject of hot weather maybe not helping out with the virus as much as some of us hope it does. Chance that's probably true. Robert Barnes says we could play the games if we could test the coaches and players before the games, play them without fans. I've also heard that there's maybe a chance that, when you go to a sporting event now, you have to go through pretty substantial security to get into the stadium. It may become part of that security check, temperature check before you go in, which is amazing to think about, but we could be heading towards that. Timothy Miller says, what worries you the most about the Dogs missing spring ball? So I'm going to talk more about this in the podcast today, that there is finally, for the first time in a few years, some disagreement about Georgia from the national media. For the most part, the last few years, everyone has pretty much thought the same thing about Georgia. This was, on paper, one of the 4 or 5 best teams in the country and probably the second best team in the SEC, and therefore probably likely to just miss out on the playoff. In the last couple of years, that's basically been what the case has been. There's been this sort of unanimous agreement on the part of the national media about Georgia. This offseason, you see a little less agreement. For instance, I know Mike Griffith wrote about this. USA Today and moved Georgia up to number 3 in its preseason poll on the basis of getting Jamie Newman, but not everyone's quite so sold. ESPN still has Alabama ranked ahead of Georgia, for instance. Pete Futak, our buddy from College Football News, says that Georgia could be the SEC team most likely to disappoint this upcoming season. You see some disagreement about Georgia, and it's fair to point out, what that disagreement hinges on, and I think it all comes down to this. Is the offense for the Dogs truly going to evolve as much as it needs to for Georgia to have the kind of success it needs to have? That's a huge, huge question right now. And so I think back to last season when a lot of national media folks were like, well, the one big Achilles heel for Georgia is going to be the lack of experience at wide receiver. And for the most part, if you go back and listen to our show, I kind of downplayed that because of the overall talent level that the group had. And I would cite Dominic Blaylock, and I would cite George Pickens and all that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? Pickens was as good as advertised. Blaylock was as good as advertised, and yet that overall talent level couldn't help the group overall overcome the fact that J.J. Holland wasn't here anymore, and Riley Ridley wasn't here anymore, and McCole Hardman wasn't here anymore. That concern on paper ended up being a legitimate concern on the field. So to go back to the question that I was asked, what's the biggest, worry for you about not having spring practice? The worry about not having spring practice is the same as the worry I would have to begin the season, which is that the experts who have highlighted Georgia's offensive woes are still correct, and that Georgia, for whatever reason, isn't able to fully transform itself despite bringing in a new quarterback and despite bringing in a new offensive coordinator. I guess, allow for the possibility that this transformation that needs to take place might not necessarily occur. And from that standpoint, I think the potential pressure of, hey, you got to get it done, you got to win, you got to do everything you can. I think that pressure is potentially good because I think it can motivate Georgia to make the changes it really truly needs to make. The fact that Smart made such an outside the box hire, a little bit different than you would expect him to make, I think it's probably a pretty good hint and a clue that he sees the need to change. But it's more difficult than just blinking your eyes or snapping your fingers and all of a sudden it gets done. Just it's more challenging than that. So my worry and concern about missing spring practice is essentially the same as my sort of global concern about Georgia this season. Of is it going to be better on offense? Is it going to improve enough to make itself a legitimate national championship contender? Because Georgia last season was outside the national championship discussion because it was not good enough offensively. Keith Finney says the running game concerns me. We barely have a 1,000-yard rusher. Yeah, that's the other part of that, Keith. I think it's a fairly good point to bring up, is that you have to predate Todd Gurley's arrival in Athens. You have to probably go back to 2011 to find a time in which Georgia has less of a proven running game than what it has to start the season. Now, no one's going to shed any tears for Georgia because the guys you have stepping in here are Kendall Milton and Zamir White, former nation's #1 running back, McIntosh, who UGA fans obviously like what they saw from last year, and James Cook, who's a pretty nice prospect as well. So no one's going to shed tears for Georgia for what it has to try to replace the DeAndre Swifts of the world. But in terms of returning production as a running back, and I guess, what's the word I'm looking for here? Confidence in what the true pecking order is going to be for those running backs, it's almost a decade since Georgia has had less knowns at that position. I think that Zamir White, now another year removed from injuries, I think there's a very good chance he's a much better player this season than he was last season. I think there's a very good chance that's the case. But there's also at least some possibility that maybe that explosiveness just doesn't return. I hate to even speak in those terms, but that kind of goes to where Keith is coming to on this. You can't say for sure what you're going to get from Zamir. You can't say for sure what you're going to get from Kendall, what you're going to get from other guys. You can't say that for sure necessarily right now. You at least have to consider the possibility on that. AU says he thinks Grantham's defense will always be Florida's weakness. Yeah, when it comes to dealing with the Grantham defense, I feel very confident for Georgia being able to get that done. Very confident for Georgia being able to get that done. Jay Shipe says it's going to be a lot easier to run without the box being stacked. I think that's true. A quarterback that can keep it on the option, on the read option play, receivers who are a little bit more respected, I think makes things a lot easier in the running game. That's probably true. Lindsey Hardeman says running a little bit late, but nonetheless, Lindsey, I'm glad to have you here. Pete Williams says I forgot about Zion Logue. Yeah, there are a few guys on the Georgia roster we haven't quite seen yet that can be easy to forget about just a bit. And so we'll get a chance to hopefully see more of those this upcoming year. Margaret Brooks says, what if students are not allowed back on campus? Can there still be football? I don't know the answer to that question for sure, but at some point in time, I guess, Margaret, we do need students to be allowed back to feel pretty good about that. I mean, I think that football, for the most part, is going to take its cues from other things in life, whether it be students on campus or whatever else. So I think you've just got to hope for a lot of good news here over the course of the next couple of months. Let's see some sport return to playing without fans, for instance. If we can get to that point in time, then it becomes easier to take that next step in that process. Cliff Payne on the subject. Oh, by the way, it's kind of funny. Cliff, normally a YouTube viewer, I believe over here on Facebook now, he says he's talking about Trey Hill. I'm not quite so sure I agree with that. I think that Hill's settling in to be a pretty dependable center, and I think you're going to like him this year. I think we wrote about this at DawgNation.com over the weekend of projecting the Georgia offensive line. I don't know how good I feel about my projections, but in terms of Trey Hill being a trusted center, I feel pretty good about that. Philip Jordan Wells talking about Athens in the fall if there's no football. Yeah, I can't even think about that. That is a thought process I can't even go to. Steve Highland, on the subject of running back, says he thinks that Zeus and Milton will be the lead dogs. Those are my picks as well to be the leading rusher and second leading rusher this season. And he says the rest of the running back core will solidify the run game. Yeah, I mean, really what you're looking for is the perfect version of this, going back to, say, 2017, two guys getting you 2,500 yards, and then the rest of the group kind of getting you over that 3,000 mark. And that'd be nice to be able to see, although maybe a little unrealistic this upcoming season. Matt Talley says he sees Salyer playing tackle for the Dogs this fall. Yeah, I guess that at a certain point, I was sort of hoping that maybe Salyer could be pushed back inside, but it just seems unrealistic that's going to happen. The closer we get to the start of the season, just given the fact that Salyer is probably Georgia's best overall offensive line prospect right now, it does start to remind you a little bit of Isaiah Wynn, who was kind of pushed to that tackle role because you didn't really have anybody else to necessarily put there. So at this point in time, Salyer being that guy for Georgia seems pretty obvious. And maybe it's even a left tackle because of the fact that you don't have anybody else proven there for that spot. I've sort of hoped that would not be the case, but as we get towards the start of the season, it seems likely that's going to be the case. Jarvis Hanna also mentioning the tight end situation, mentions John Fitzpatrick. And as excited as I am about Darnell Washington, and why would you not be, and Trey McKitty, who I think really brings a lot to the table for Georgia, I've been very clear about this. Whether it be Rylan Godey, who had a very nice video that kind of got some attention the other day, or John Fitzpatrick, who's also been on campus now for a little while. In terms of being that pass-catching tight end for Georgia, I'm really hopeful that Fitzpatrick and Godey get their chance to prove what they're all about, and I think they will get that chance. And I would not be surprised at all if they really emerge as guys worth paying attention to in that role. I think that there's a real argument to be made right now for the guys who've been here for a while, Godey and Fitzpatrick, and I'm really, really supportive of them, of really getting a chance for some playing time this upcoming year, for sure. Chris Slim White also mentioning the fact we haven't seen Clay Webb play. And I know Webb's a former 5-star, but the truth is, he's not really behind schedule, right? I mean, this is a much deeper offensive line than it's been in the past, that it's really only now time to even think about Webb getting on a football field. The average person that kind of followed his recruitment last year, or I should say 2 cycles ago, followed the previous season, I don't think there's a huge expectation that Webb is going to play a ton. And Webb has let it be known that he's willing to kind of go to guard if that can help get him on the field sooner. I think the competition for Webb, realistically, to earn some playing time begins right now. I don't know that he was necessarily thought of as someone likely to get a lot of playing time a year ago. So I know anytime a 5-star guy is not playing, and in Webb's case, frequently not traveling, I know there can be kind of some eye-raising stuff about that, but this is just a very deep offensive line, the 2019 team was. And I wouldn't assume that Webb was behind schedule because he wasn't really on that too deep. I wouldn't be too worried about that. Alan McGovern says, just hoping that the team can have a full summer to work out and get into camp in shape. Hopefully, as the new rollees get to campus, they'll be back rolling. I understand where you're coming from on that, and you hope that's the case. However, if for some reason that's not the case, if for some reason, we're not feeling good about things from a health standpoint in our world until a few months from now, I still want the season to start as early as it possibly can. In other words, I don't want to delay the season just because coaches aren't comfortable putting their team on the field. And that's true for Georgia as well. As much as I want to see Georgia win a national championship, I believe that this season, just playing the games is more important than anything else. Our society needs these games, needs them bad. Our economy needs these games, needs them bad. So, as I've said a few times here before, I will take ugly football even from Georgia if it means we get the games in the field sooner rather than later. I just think that's kind of where our world is right now. And obviously, I hope that Georgia's in full preparation mode and everything else, but I need football one way or another as soon as I can possibly get it. Thomas Van Santa supporting Jamie Newman says, surrounded by great talent, going to be great. I think that Newman can have a very good year. I think the other nice thing here is you don't necessarily need Newman to be great for Georgia to be great. You just need Newman to be good. He's got Heisman odds. He's actually one of the, better odds to win the Heisman Trophy, and maybe he will win the award. But Georgia can win the national championship without Jamie Newman winning the Heisman Trophy, which is kind of a nice thing. Looks like we've got some YouTube trolls in here. It's good to know that even during this social distancing period, some troll behavior still takes place here. Let's get a few more Facebook comments. By the way, we'll get ready to roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down in a minute. I'll remind you that R.S. Andrews Air Conditioning, that's Engineered Solutions of Georgia, which are great folks as well. They're great folks as well. So this is what happens when you put me in charge of the air quote graphics. Here we go. R.S. Andrews, Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. My air conditioning is on right now. I bet yours probably is as well. Because A, I'm hot natured, and B, it's just that time of year. And so if yours is not working the way that you want it to, well, they can help you with that. At $99 Smiley checkup, they can get you ready to go. But you got to find them online at rsandrews.com. They can get your system back to factory fresh spec. Story after story, RS Andrews has been delivering smiles for a long time. And Dari and the whole team over there can deliver a smile for you. But as I said before, you got to check them out online. The website, once again, as my kids have been nice enough to let you know, is rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. All right, we got a few more comments to roll through here. Lindsey Hardeman on the subject of Trey Sermon at Ohio State. Speaking of that, I'm sure you all saw Travion Henderson committed to Ohio State too. Not considered a surprise. Buckeyes going big with running backs early, which is something we sort of predicted they would do. And Jeff Ingram says that UGA had a great offensive line, but they didn't play great as a unit. Yeah, I mean, if you pay attention like the Football Outsider stuff, that kind of measures, running back stats and things like that. Georgia was very good as a pass protecting group last year, but just not that great from a running game standpoint, which was a huge departure from where it had been in 2018, where Georgia had been stellar when it comes to its running game situation. But Georgia was not great at that a year ago. And that's one of the things you got to be better at here this upcoming season. You got to be better at getting those offensive line yards, those runs of 5 yards or so, opening that hole for that immediate burst for the running back. You got to do more of that this upcoming season. I think play calling can help you with that. I do. Chris Brandon says, I'll play the offensive line. That means that Georgia gets in the field sooner rather than later. And I'm sure there'd be plenty of volunteers to do the same thing. Christopher Perkins says he thinks the offense is going to be different this year. I hope so. Boy, I hope so. I hope so. Clifford Jones says, so Georgia will be the first team in history to not to have a spring practice installing a new quarterback and a new offense and defensive coordinator win the SEC, the ridiculous spin machine. So back and forth we go over here on YouTube. Green Soldier says it'll be nice to see the running backs get some help with the RPOs and the zone reads. It's going to make it, I think it's going to help against stack box. I do. I mean, obviously, when you do that zone read and the quarterback's not ever keeping it, well, it's just easier for the defense to know how to handle that, right? It's just much easier for the defense to be able to do that. And so this upcoming year, that'll be nice. I've also made the case that when you have a running quarterback, I mean, think about like the bootleg, or just like, a scramble. If you're a defensive back, you have to freeze just for a moment to see if he's running in your direction, right? Because you may have a tackle to make, if you're safety, especially in certain situations like that. So that moment of what's Newman doing? I'm flat-footed. That's all the time you need sometimes for whether it be a speedy receiver like D-Rob or even a less speedy receiver like Pickens to get more open. And that was something our complaint of the Georgia offense last year was it always came down to, well, the Georgia receivers aren't fast enough to get open. But those of us that watch football, even if we're not X's and O's experts, we see lots of examples where receivers get open using something other than just blazing speed. Because the fact of the matter is, the SEC level, you really can't recruit that many receivers who are going to run past SEC defensive backs. They're not easy to do. Defensive backs don't get into this league without being, top end elite speed. So you've got to have other clubs in your bag beyond just let me run past someone. You've got to be able to do more than just that. And so, giving defensive backs something else to think about, using physicality. I love the rub plays that, the Monken style offense always seem to have. The defense calls them pick plays. The offense calls them rub routes, where guys going this way and the guy, cuts right in front of him. And, that little, brief shield, like a pick play, becomes something to get a guy open. That's what you hope to be able to see more of, more creativity, more ways to get receivers open beyond just, well, if you can't run past a guy, this is not flag football on a beach. That may be all you need if you're just playing pickup football, but at real SEC football, there aren't that many examples of guys just running past people. Green Soldier. Absolutely going in on the Facebook crowd. I'm not going to read that. I'm not sowing discord here today. I'm not doing that. Spencer Hartley says, not to mention a quarterback that can throw a wide receiver open. Yeah, I mean, there's going to have to be some of that too. You know, no doubt about that. Lindsey Hardeman says the SEC is hands down the toughest conference to play, and I agree with that. Jeff Ingram talking about the Gators here. Frank Crowder says, I never understood the purpose of running the zone read with Fromm. Yeah, I mean, listen, I love Jake, but at a certain point in time, that play got a little frustrating for a lot of people, I think. I think that's probably true. Matt Rogavina says, I'm wearing the beard well. That's good to know. I will say this, that while my kids don't like it at all, my wife is definitely starting to come around on it a little bit. Definitely starting to come around. Randy Hall says D-Rob was fast enough to run past people, and he probably was. But even with him, at a certain point, that thing of, well, let's try to throw the ball to him because he can run past people, even that wasn't really working. I've said this before, Robertson got targeted 6 times in the first half against Georgia Tech. Only came up with a couple of those as catches. This was a guy that Georgia was trying to get involved, but at a certain point in time, even for a speedy receiver like D-Rob, you've got to have an element of creativity about how you're getting that done, for sure. Christopher Perkins, I don't agree with this. He says that Campbell needs to step up his game. What I see Campbell not turning his head on coverage. I will say that when Campbell was healthy at the beginning of the season and really past like the first quarter of the season, he wasn't healthy at all. I thought that Tyson Campbell looked fantastic. Now I'm a little bit of a Tyson Campbell homer for whatever reason. I've sort of always been that guy. Some of y'all give me a hard time for not giving some players enough credit and giving some players too much credit. Our commenters have kind of always given me credit for being a bit of a Campbell homer. I'm not from South Florida. I just always kind of liked Tyson. I liked what I saw from Tyson a year ago, and I absolutely believe that Campbell is one of the best players in this team this fall. I'm a big believer in Tyson Campbell. Big believer. I think the secondary overall is really deep, but I think Campbell's a good-time player. And Chris Branham seems to agree with me, referencing some issues in 2018 that I don't think were there in 2019. I thought that Tyson, when healthy, was much better. I think it's one of the untold stories of last season. For whatever reason, we gloss over this. Georgia just did not have a healthy Tyson Campbell really at all. I mean, even at the end of the season, he still wasn't healthy. And for the most part, it didn't matter because Georgia's defense is pretty good. But not pretty good. It was very, very good. But Georgia had to play most of last season without one of its best players. And somehow they just kind of gotten lost. They just kind of got lost. So Joel Moody looking like he's excited about the Georgia offense. Great to see. I'll read his comment. He says it's going to be great play scheming, great route runners with great hands, a quarterback that can throw into tight windows. Maybe Georgia can check all the boxes. Boy, you'd love to see it. I mean, I don't have to tell you this. You already know this. If Georgia's offense takes a huge step forward, then it's game over, go home for everybody else. It just is. And taking that big next step is not easy. But when you have a defense that at the very least, we already know, the defense is going to be very good at limiting yards and limiting points because that's what Kirby Smart defenses are. Is it impactful to the tune of 40-plus sacks? We don't know that yet. Might be. Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson and all those guys. They might. Azeez Ojulari, obviously. They might be. But we know that Georgia's going to only give up a limited number of yards and only give up a limited number of points. Therefore, try to follow me on this very astute football point. If you're not giving up very many points, but you're scoring a lot of points, at that point in time, you're very, very difficult to beat. So last year, Georgia had a great defense and, frankly, an offense that struggled to be average most of the time. If they were to take another step towards the improvement direction offensively, that will be a panic moment for most of the rest of the SEC, a panic moment, because that is a very difficult combination to deal with. Hayes Galloway says, I'd love to see beat Alabama and then beat them again in the SEC championship game. And that's what I predicted to happen. That's what I believe will happen. VTW wants to see more Adam Anderson. You may get a chance to do that. I think Adam is still kind of in that role that DeAndre Walker was in, not 2018 DeAndre Walker, but more like 2017 DeAndre Walker. And that version of DeAndre Walker is actually really good. Walker in 2017 had a very underrated season. And if you want to put together a list of the most underrated seasons, or really, this would actually be a pretty fun thing. I know Connor Riley's been doing his bracket of the top moments in the Kirby Smart era. Maybe a fun thing to do would be to look at the most underrated players. DeAndre Walker is definitely on that list of underrated players. Because, I mean, Go back and watch the first half of the Alabama, and I hate to even bring this up because it's an awful memory. It's an awful memory. But go back and watch the 2018 Alabama game before Walker got hurt. This guy was a wrecking ball against the Crimson Tide. And then he got hurt, and the rest of the game was obviously, how it ended. But in 2017, DeAndre Walker was a tackle for loss machine, and he was in kind of a specialized role. And that's, I think, still the role that Adam Anderson occupies because of his speed, because of his length. Anderson looks like an NBA player because of that interesting frame that he has and really, really fast speed for someone that size. He's in kind of that DeAndre Walker 2017 role, which is, I think, a pretty fun role to be in. I mean, honestly, what if you were a football player and they told you, hey, when you get in the game, we want you to pin your ears back and just go? Like, how much would you just love that? Like, Walker gets like the best job in the world when he comes in the game. Not Walker. Anderson gets the best job in the world. He gets to come in the game and just pin his ears back. At least that's, to my eyes, what I see happening. That's got to be a fun job, right? Kevin Wynn, I agree with. He says that Jermaine Burton is going to be a huge playmaker. His flip was greatly underrated. Yeah, I think that he's a very, very interesting athlete. And the fact that he was, in LSU's class at one point in time was a huge flex for Kirby to be able to get that done. I think you're probably right about that. And I think his impact at Georgia will be greatly felt. He's a very, very interesting athlete. The fact that he's gotten such good specialized training from a buddy Terrence Edwards is also a nice thing there as well. We've got a couple of more minutes, so let's get as many comments as we can. Let's see what else is going on. Devote says, what do you think about Darnell Washington? I think that Washington is probably one of the craziest looking recruits I've ever seen. To be that athletic and that big. I mean, he's like, I know we've made the comparison before, but he's like LeBron James. He's like 270 pounds. He's tall. He's one of the craziest looking physical specimens that I've ever seen Georgia recruit, or really ever seen anybody recruit. I do think that you've got to find a way to be a pass catcher at that size. And, what I can't tell about Darnell is I can't tell if it's like I just saw so much of a Rick Gilbert, right? Gilbert was the guy that Darnell always got compared to. And I live here in suburban Atlanta. Rick was in Marietta, so I saw a lot of his highlights. Gilbert on a team with a million, college prospects was that team's best receiver. That was the guy they were going to. He had catches in every single game. He was catching balls for touchdowns. He was productive. I didn't see as much of that from Washington at the high school level. Doesn't mean he wasn't doing it. He's just all the way out in Las Vegas. Maybe I just didn't see enough of his highlights or see enough of his games. I saw a lot more of a Rick Gilbert in high school. So my question about Washington is going to be, is he as impactful of a pass catcher as what Gilbert was, and what I think that Gilbert can be in college? But you can't get a better athletic profile than what Washington brings to the table. This is just size and speed, and I mean it's like a video game creation. But if he's going to be compared to a Rick Gilbert in terms of playmaking abilities, that's obviously a pretty tough comparison to live up to. George Herman says defense is going to be bringing bad intentions. I like the idea of that. Hunter Davis also excited about Jermaine Burton. Yeah, me too. Me too. VTW says he thinks that Gilbert's a better receiver than Washington right now. I guess I think that's probably true, but it doesn't mean it ends up that way. Washington can learn at this level, and he's got the kind of thing that can't be taught. But as VTW kind of suggests, it's just tough to do with that a Rick Gilbert comparison because I just think that Gilbert's just over them. I just think he's amazing. I think Gilbert's amazing. Amazing. Green Soldier on the subject of Joe Burrow keeping plays alive. Yeah, that's one of those things you love the idea of Jamie Newman being able to do. Chris Branham getting some work done. We appreciate that. Matt Rukavina says compares Darnell to Aaron Hernandez from a football standpoint. We know what kind of a matchup nightmare Hernandez was from a football standpoint. It became a very different kind of nightmare after that. But you know the point he's trying to make there. Mike Gay says if you look back at what the big tight end did against Georgia last year, if Darnell Washington catch, he's going to dominate. Yeah, for sure. I mean, just really tough to guard because, once again, I'm going to be kind of pretending to be more of an X's and O's expert than I probably am. But the challenge of these tight ends, because they're running so many of their routes over the middle, it's like you have two different position groups that have to pay attention. You got linebackers and you got safeties. And so it's hard to double team a tight end, right? I mean, it's easier to bracket a receiver because it's off towards the sideline. But trying to bracket a tight end over the middle just takes some key defenders out of the play. So if he's big enough to post up and fast enough to run past, then obviously that is a impossible matchup. That's why at the NFL level, I'll always take a Pro Bowl tight end over a Pro Bowl wide receiver. If you give me just a stark choice between A or B, I think the Pro Bowl tight end at the NFL level may be more valuable. At the college level, maybe not. But that's the possibility of what he could potentially bring to the table. Spencer Harley says, can Trayvon Walker fill Roquan's shoes? I think that Trayvon Walker is a different kind of player than Roquan Smith, but in terms of being thought of in the same caliber of player, absolutely, I believe that Trayvon Walker is on pace to potentially be that kind of player. I think that Georgia has a few guys that are obviously stars in the making. At least that seemed that way, and he's certainly as much as anybody on that. Let's do a couple more and get ready to get out of here. I'll also remind you of this, that today, John Stinchcomb on our podcast, it's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Don't forget, I told you last week, stop by, got some great to-go food for Marlowe's. They've always had a dedicated portion of their business for to-go orders. That means they've got people who do that work anyway. I went to the tavern right here in my neighborhood. I walked in. The way they had it set up was the patio was set up just for the to-go orders. And so I didn't have to go into the restaurant even. I just went to the patio. The food was sitting there for me. I'd already paid for it, so just picked it up, walked out. It was the easiest thing to do, super clean. I didn't come within 20 feet of any human being. It was just very, very easy to do. So their to-go stuff right now, very easy to pick up to help support our friends there at Marlowe's Tavern. And if you want to say a big thank you to someone, we've talked before about all the people that are, whether it be a truck driver keeping the grocery store stocked, or the folks there at Kroger who are, working overtime to make sure that we get all the stuff that we need. Healthcare workers, obviously, a great way to show some thank you to them is with a Marlowe's Tavern gift card right now. When you purchase one between now and April the 15th, they're going to add 20% to your order. So go to info@marlowestavern.com. It's an email address, info@marlowestavern.com. You can find out more information about that. All right, let's do a couple more, and we got to get ready to get out of here after that. Joel Moody mentioned Nicole Kmet, who absolutely just destroyed Georgia in the first half at Notre Dame game. 7 catches in the first half. It was a matchup nightmare. He really was. He was very much a matchup nightmare. And it was funny. He'd been injured before that. We hadn't really seen him. And then he stepped on the field. It was just so tough to deal with. So tough to deal with. All right. Looks like y'all are having a good time over on YouTube arguing with this Florida fan. Hope y'all are enjoying that. Is there anything else I need to do before we get ready to get out of here? Oh, Gator Hater Updater. Thank you, Charles Kaiser, for the reminder. Yeah, so let's show that off. Of course, our buddy Eddie would not let us get out of here without doing that. Eddie says hello to all of you. He wishes he could see y'all, but he's enjoying himself nonetheless. By the way, speaking of Eddie, I was watching a little bit of Days of Thunder yesterday. It was like early in the morning. I was watching the Days of Thunder. I'd forgotten that Randy Quaid was in Days of Thunder. Very different version of him than the version from Christmas Vacation. But funny to see Randy Quaid in Days of Thunder playing more of a buttoned-up businessman. But that made me think of Cousin Eddie for sure. Anyway, nonetheless, Gatorade Updater, 1,248 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. 1,248 days. For our Gator Hater Updater, we'll say thanks to all of you, and I'll show off my other Gator Hater graphic here for a moment. There we go. 1,248 for the Gator Hater. 1,248 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. By the way, over here on YouTube with some Florida fans having some fun at the Georgia fans' expense. That's a pretty good reminder for all of them as well. I'm going to get the podcast version of our show coming up here in just a little bit. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door. Hope you'll check that out. Really fun interview with John Stinchcomb as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. I'll get more into the black jersey thing. I'll get more into the ways in which there's a little bit of national disagreement about Georgia right now. We'll hear from Kirby Smart, a challenge for some UGA student athletes. So it's a busy edition of our podcast. That is coming up. Thanks to all of you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door for right now. We appreciate all of that. Hope you guys have a great day, and we will look forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We'll talk to you then, everybody.